Over the last few weeks in Life's a Game, we have learned something important. Know what it is? Life's a game, yeah. That's it, Bill. And every move matters. And our first week, we covered Tetris, and we said, God is building something in us. In the game of Tetris, the blocks fall down, and it looks all confusing, and sometimes you feel like everything's going well, and then some weird block comes down, and you don't know where to go, and it just seems like a big mess. But we noted that God tells us, He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion. So even if you're in the midst of this maze, of this puzzle, of all this mess, knowing that God's still at work. But He does tell us it's a battle, and we talked about that in Battleship. Sometimes it's about surviving, and sometimes it can feel like war. Because guess what? It is war. It's spiritual warfare. And Satan, his favorite thing to do is to make it feel like it's not spiritual warfare and make it feel like it's just warfare between us and between those around us and between either the church or between believers and unbelievers. And we tend to look at others and they got a problem and they're evil. And we need to remember that the evil is Satan and that there's a spiritual battle going on and that God is aware of that and He's with us. So we need to know that the battle is real. See, that's part of the problem, I think, sometimes, and this happens to me. We get caught off guard. We get comfortable, and something happens that we weren't expecting, and we're like, how did this happen? And we have to remember that this is a battle, and Satan is looking for someone to devour. We said that. He is a roaring lion looking for someone to devour, but we serve the Lion of Judah. We have a bigger lion. And we need to know that He is always with us. He says you're not alone. And then last week, Corbin brought us a timely message on humility and joy, even when the race gets messy, through Mario Kart and talking about that. Can we give Corbin a hand? Thank you, Corbin. That was a great message last week. And God's been showing us each week that He's not just playing games. He's shaping us for something. And today, we're going to get surgical. Because there are some things in our lives He wants to remove. Things that are holding us back from His best. Each week we've been walking through the book of Philippians. Philippians was written by the Apostle Paul. And Paul was having a good old time in jail. It's a short letter, yet it's packed full of joy, hope, purpose, and endurance. I mean, no matter what you may be going through, what I may be going through, whatever we may be feeling and experiencing, Paul was in prison, and he still found joy because the joy of the Lord was his strength. And he doesn't write as a victim. He's writing like someone who knows the outcome, even in the middle of the mess. So who remembers the game Operation? So you had these little pieces, like bones or organs, weird shapes, with those tiny tweezers. Does anyone remember? Don't let me down here. Embarrass me, make me feel like I'm the only one. What was the hardest piece to get out of there? What? What? Well, for me, it was the wishbone. That was really, really difficult for me. I guess the heart was difficult too. And I said, defer to Bill since he was a doctor. He would know. How many wishbones did you have to operate on? But you tried to get it, and if your hand slipped, buzz, you hit the edge, everything lit up, the alarm sounded. And that is what real ministry for God looks like. It's slow, It's careful, intentional work in someone's life. You can't just barge in and yank things out. It takes time, patience, and most of all, love. And some of you know exactly what that feels like. God has been doing heart surgery in you. And maybe it's been slow. Maybe it's been uncomfortable. But He's steady. And God does not make mistakes. You know, in the game Operation, there is one goal, really: fix what's broken without making it worse. And honestly, it's a lot like what God is doing in each of us. You and I, we're not finished. And we've got areas that still need healing. And it takes precision, it takes attention. But the hardest part sometimes, but the most beautiful part when we embrace it, is that God does His deepest work through relationships. A lot of times we try to avoid relationships, especially when we're hurting. We try to avoid those things, and it's those very things that God uses. We say here at Westshore that we want to be for each other and with each other, and it can be hard sometimes. Last week, Paul showed us the attitude and humility of Christ. This week, he gives us two living examples, two men who lived that out. And they weren't famous apostles. They were ordinary believers, yet faithfully serving. And that's where we see the game of Operation really come alive. Philippians 2, 19 through 30, we're going to read in a moment. It's not just filler or travel plans. You might just read through that kind of quickly. But it's a glimpse into how God works in and through ordinary believers. And I guess that's the first thing we need to write down, is that God works in you as you serve others. God works in you as you serve others. You know, when we're hurting, when we're struggling, many times we just want to get away. But it's through serving others that God does His greatest work. So let's go ahead and turn to Philippians 2, 19 through 30. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, that I also may be cheered when I receive news about you. I have no one else like him who will show genuine concern for your welfare. For everyone looks out for their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. But you know that Timothy has proved himself, because as a son with his father, he has served with me in the work of the gospel. Timothy was a man who God worked in first, and then He worked through him. Too many times, we try to rush the process. That's why we always say, you know, like when a new believer comes to Christ, we don't want to just throw them out there right away. They have to learn some things. They need to grow in Christ a little bit, and churches need to do that as well. And sometimes people look at the church and they say, well, it's not moving fast enough, or this isn't happening, or that's not happening. But sometimes, you know, there was a time recently, sometime over the last year, where I was sitting in the back and I was looking at the backs of everyone's heads, and I saw so many different things going on at the same time. I saw some people playing on their phones. I saw some people ruffling through things. But I saw something else, too, that God revealed into me. I saw broken relationships. I saw people who'd lost someone who was having a hard time with their children or family members. I saw other people who were struggling with addictions. And I realized that the church is not what we think it is. We think the church is, I think people who come to Westshore or who leave Westshore or whatever think that the church is JR and the elders, and it's not, and Corbin, but it's not. The church is the church. And it's not just what JR, Corbin, the elders, and Deb can put on the app for us to do. It's a bunch of a ragtag people who are broken. And there's so many different people that God is working in at the same time. And we need to realize that as a church, that we are all, God is working in each one of our lives. Sadly, we have these blinders sometimes where all we see is what's going on in our life. But then when we realize that things are going on in other people's lives, we realize that ministry and church work and discipleship, none of that can be rushed. These are things that God works in each person, in each place, and in each church. And God is working in our church. And as He's working in our church and has been working in our church, He will begin to work through our church as well. But I remember when I first became the associate pastor and our previous church in Midland, and the senior pastor told me that he was looking to leave. I had been in like 2 weeks, and I'm already thinking about being the senior pastor. I am so glad God did not answer that prayer for me. I was definitely not ready. I still wonder if I'm ready, but He had to do a lot of work in me before He could work through me. And we see this with Timothy. Timothy, there's a lot of things that God worked in him, and through that, he was able to work through him. He continues on in verse 23, I hope, therefore, to send him as soon as I see how things go with me, and I am confident in the Lord that I myself will come soon. But I think it is necessary to send back to you Epaphroditus, my brother, co-worker, and fellow soldier, who is also your messenger, whom you sent to take care of my needs. For he longs for all of you and is distressed because you heard he was ill. Indeed, he was ill, and he almost died. But God had mercy on him, and not on him only, but also on me, to spare me sorrow upon sorrow. Therefore, I'm all the more eager to send him, so that when you see him again, you may be glad, and I may have less anxiety. So then, welcome him in the Lord with great joy, and honor people like him, because he almost died for the work of Christ. He risked his life to make up for the help you yourselves could not give. He's saying, they sent Epaphroditus to Paul to help Paul, and he got there and he's working so hard, he worked himself sick. He got sick and ill and was no longer able to do the things he wanted to do and needed to do. And that's another lesson for us, is to do what God has put before us, but not try to do more than what we are able or ready for or called to. Because God, He will let us know when it's time. First, He must work in us, and then He will work through us. And I guess it needs to be said, He's not going to perfect us. We are not going to, it's not saying you got to be perfect before we got to be perfect, have it all together. No. But there is a difference. There's a difference between somebody who's stumbling and falling, but still seeking the Lord, and who's crying out, Lord, I don't know how to do this, I can't do this, and they're struggling, but they're still seeking the Lord. There's a difference between that person and someone who says, Lord, I don't want to hear it. So when God is working in you, you know that because you are willing to do what He has called you to do, even when you don't think you can do it, because you know it is Him working in you. And when you get to that point where you're allowing Him to work in you, that is when He will begin to work through you, and that is when you'll see amazing things. Paul mentions these guys because they weren't celebrity pastors. I mean, to us, we hear their names, and we to Timothy, and we're like, oh, yeah, Timothy. But back then, that wasn't like a celebrity. They were just real people He was sharing with them. They were faithful. They were humble. They were tested. And they were compassionate. And we see in them the work of the game operation. In operation, you need a steady hand and a gentle touch to remove what's hurting and heal what's broken. It's tedious work. It's detailed, and you can't rush it. And as we said, that's the same in the church. Ministry is often messy, but it's worth every careful step. Sometimes In ministry, we want to just kind of brush it past or just ignore it or forget about it or move on. But it takes more than just that. It's the same in our relationships, especially in our relationships. If trust is broken, trust is fragile. And repairing it, it takes two things. It takes at least two things, but it takes patience and it takes grace. And it takes patience and grace for both sides of the equation. Everyone involved in a relationship. When trust is broken, it takes careful attention. We talked earlier on in this series, or in the last series, to be slow to speak, quick to listen. And so many times we're just quick to speak and slow to listen. And as we're able to work through those things and allow God to work in us, that's when relationships can truly be restored. Same in discipleship. It's tedious. Its growth is slow sometimes, but it's life-changing over time as you grow. Sometimes people are like, I don't want to read the Bible, it's boring to me, or I don't understand it. And it's like, but as you take time to listen for the voice of your Father, you will hear the words that He wants you to hear in the way that He wants you to hear them. God is doing heart surgery in all of us. And He often uses other people as His tools. And that's what Paul is showing us here. And some of you, maybe you're frustrated because you've been waiting for God to do something big. Some major breakthrough. Many times we wait for that, but we ignore the small, steady work that He's been doing through the people around us. And what if that quiet, behind-the-scenes work is exactly what will heal you? What if it's the friend checking in? What if it's the person praying for you? What if it's the brother or sister giving you a hard truth? What if that's the surgery God is using to heal your heart or someone else's heart? I was just thinking about that, how hard it is, like, Bill, like, when you, like, surgery, like, you ever just run in and just cut somebody open? It's just, you can't do that, right? You got to be numbed a little bit, right? You got to be, it takes time, but the fact is there's still pain involved. There's always pain involved. There's always something that's got to happen. And sometimes we try to avoid that. Maybe it's the phone call you didn't feel like making. Or maybe it's the text to someone just to check in. Or maybe it's the prayer you prayed for someone even when you didn't want to pray for them, but you prayed for them anyway. And in reality, you're praying for yourself. I love the song talks about forgiveness, that the one who's really set free is you. These types of things where we reach out and we do those things, or we humble ourselves, those things, they don't make headlines, but they make disciples. A lot of times we're looking for a big event or a big thing to make the headline. What if your greatest growth doesn't come from the next big event or emotional high? What if your greatest growth just comes simply from showing up and serving? Too many people, me included, many times we live for the events. We live for the highs, and then they abandon ship when things aren't going their way in the lows. But what if spiritual surgery in your life is happening not on a stage, but it's happening in daily obedience, quiet sacrifices, faithful friendships. I talked about when calls the heart. We're in earlier, like mid-seasons or whatever, and Elizabeth and her best friend on there had kind of a falling out, stepping on each other's toes a little bit, and both of them were absolutely miserable. And Carrie will tell you, so was I. Because I had to watch these stupid episodes. Man. And they finally just said, you know what? I love you. And your friendship is too important to me. And it doesn't mean that everything that they said or did was all of a sudden just washed away or gone, but they felt free again because that's where their hearts should have been all along. It's in those faithful friendships sometimes and that's what makes a friendship truly faithful. It's not just because it's a good thing all the time. That's what makes faith in our lives. It's not because we're just always walking, on the yellow brick road, everything's beautiful and great and stuff. That's not what makes a faithful life. That's not what makes a faithful friendship, a faithful parent or spouse or child. That's not what makes faithfulness. Faithfulness is faithfulness in the midst of trials and tribulations and saying, I'm going to be faithful because this thing is more important to me than what is pulling us apart. This is the most important thing. And in our walk with Christ, there are going to be a lot of things that are going to try to pull us away. And when we remain faithful to Him and to His calling, that's when discipleship and things really start to move in our lives. So this morning, who are you letting God use in your life like a Timothy? Who are you being a Timothy to? Philippians 2:22 said that Timothy had proved himself. The word proved, it speaks to testing. And it's the kind of character that has been refined. It's been sharpened and made strong through pressure. A lot of times we feel pressure and we just want to collapse. But he made it through the pressure. And when we make it through the pressure, we come out stronger and more faithful and better in the end. But when the pressure just holds us down, we come out on the other side jaded and resentful and bitter. And all of those things affect every aspect of our lives. But it does take time. It does take some time. You can't rush it. When we try to rush things, that's when people fall out. But the gold, the pure, is refined and stands strong, firm, and faithful. And what Timothy and Epaphroditus shows us is that serving others doesn't just help them, it transforms you. We can't grow spiritually in isolation. So many people, I've been in a lot of different churches, 3 different churches I've served, and other churches I've been a member of. And I've heard countless people say, God is telling me to go somewhere else or go or do something else. And they never do. They just stay home and they just become Lone Ranger Christians. And God He didn't design the church for us to be Lone Rangers. He designed us to live life together, the good, the bad, and the ugly, every part of it. That's what makes the church different. That's what makes unbelievers look at us and say, man, I want some of that. How do I get that? Because the other stuff, that's what the world does. The world counts you out. The world backstabs. The world betrays. The world gets all that stuff. But the church, they come together even when they don't want to be together. They come together anyway. And they love each other through their pain. And it's their pain that refines them and makes their love true. Because love is an act. And there are times when we don't feel like loving our brothers and sisters in Christ. But there was also a time when Jesus, I'm pretty sure, again, when he was on the cross, he wasn't like, God, forgive these lovely people. He died for us as we were betraying him, and yet he chose that, and that's what he calls for us. And that's what he calls us to as a family. He uses people to challenge us, to stretch us, to sharpen us, and sometimes even to carry us. So I have a little homework for you this week. Think about someone right now in your mind and find a way to serve someone personally. Not randomly, not like a random act, those are fine too, but intentionally. Maybe write a note, or take a meal, or just show up. Let someone into your life. And ask someone who's spiritually mature to pray with you or speak into an area of your life. So many times we struggle because we struggle alone. You know, I'm going to mention it at the end. I'll just mention it now. If you are struggling, you do not need to struggle alone. We are here. I'll be over by the prayer room to pray with you after service. And those aren't just words on my page that I just say every week. I really mean it. And I know that's the hardest thing sometimes, is to say, I don't know how to do this, but I need help. And so go to someone who you trust, someone who's maybe a little ahead of you, or at least someone who you trust their guidance, and say, look, I'm struggling in this area, and I just need someone to pray for me and pray with me and come with me. And also take some time this week to honor a faithful friend. Like Paul says of Epaphroditus, recognize and celebrate people who serve behind the scenes. And if you are feeling tired in your serving, remember, even Epaphroditus got sick. But God had mercy on him, and Paul honored him. And that's because faithful service matters. It's also what distinguishes the faithful. Did you know that? They serve rather than be served. You ever notice how some people spend an awful lot of time talking about how their needs aren't being met? People with genuine servant hearts rarely ever talk about their needs. And sure, they have needs just like everyone else. But their focus is more on others. As Jesus himself noted when speaking of his disciples, he said, the greatest of all shall be the servant of all. And many people sit back and say, Lord, do something. Do something now. And God is saying, I did do something. Now, it's your turn. Well, in the game of operation, we don't win by just rushing through. It's not a speed game, it's a precision game. And you win by working carefully, gently, with focus and commitment. And we need to know that God is not in a hurry. He's been here a long time. He's got all eternity. He's not in the hurry business, he's in the healing business, and he'll take as much time as it needs. And right here at Westshore, he is building a people who serve with steady hands and servant hearts. That's how God works in the church, and that's how God works in you. And often it's how he works through you. Again, God works in you as you serve others. So don't check out. Stay grounded, stay firm, and stay faithful. Don't underestimate what God can do with a servant's heart and steady hands, because, my friends, God is just getting started at and in Westshore. So this week, let God put the tweezers in your hand. Ask him Who do you want me to help heal? Who do you want me to serve carefully and intentionally? Because the steady hands he uses in the game of life are yours and mine.